they didn't have television, they didn't have social media, they didn't have all that, that inundation of irrelevancies to take their minds off. This is how they dealt with, and this is how they dealt with their lives and the world of their time. And this is really how drama came about to begin with. And then it was, they added music.
Wait, we can't hear you. Christoph, we can't hear you though.
Priscilla's challenging me on which operas I like.
There you are.
No, sorry.
Yeah. You came just in time to rescue me, you know?
Jesse about opera, and because I said I need so much help. I need so much help with this art form.
Well, no, actually you were saying I didn't know anything about opera.
I need help, and then I was challenging Jesse to what he knows and how much he's listened. So
well, I've listened a bunch, but not very well. And I think that, I mean, Christoph, you grew up listening to opera, yeah?
In a way, yes. But I think I hear the wrong approach already.
Good. Well, that's why you're here.
Sorry. This is not about knowing anything.
Yeah.
Because if you need to study something before you can actually watch or listen to it, then we're already talking about something else.
Right.
Yeah. No, it actually will tell you. You don't have to. Yeah, sure. I mean, like with everything else, the more you know, the more you get.
Right.
I think this awe and this reverence or hesitation, or what else would you call it? Intimidation, exactly. This kind of point of departure from an inferior position to the grand art. Yeah, that all of that is a 19th century bullshit, excuse the expression, that made it very difficult and very, very difficult to approach these days. And that's not what it's about, really not.
Now, when you go to see an opera, tip your camera down just a little bit, if you wouldn't mind. Like when you go to see an opera, it's different than other things, right? Because if you're experiencing the whole thing. It isn't just I'm listening to music, I'm listening to the words, right? So what's the whole thing, in your mind?
The great thing is that if it bothers you what's happening on stage, you can close your eyes and you still get the whole thing.
Right.
You see? And that's a fantastic thing. Well, Wagner, our friend Richard Wagner, he was formulating that theoretically, that he called it Gesamtkunstwerk, so a unified piece of art, that everything is so, all the various elements are so closely intertwined and connected that they become one. So what's happening on stage and what's happening in the orchestra pit and the singing and the words and it should all be one, and you as an audience immerse yourself in it.
So does it, do you remember the first time you saw a really good opera? Did you understand what it was when you saw the first time?
Well, when I saw it the first time, I didn't question, I didn't feel called upon to decide what it is. It to me, I was, I don't know, 10 years old or so, it was what it was. And that's the advantage of starting early with anything, because you don't say, well, shouldn't it be this? Shouldn't it be that? Or I've heard, or, I don't know enough, or, you accept willingly that you don't know anything, and it doesn't bother you either. You know, and that's the greatest spirit that you can take to an opera. It just needs to be added that not a lot of productions hold up to that,
right?
You know, because they sort of unfairly bank on the fact that you know that you actually bring what they're supposed to do, and that's a longer discussion for a little further down.
But there's a bit of a question I have though around.
Christoph, will you tip your camera down a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. You know, in what and also, so you had this experience, you grew up watching it, your family was involved in theater and all that, you grew up with this, but also at what point is also the expertise, the level of the voice, the virtuosity, if you will, of the performance, is that also important? Like, you know, you want them to be hitting those notes loud and in pitch. So is you know, the perfection, or as close as we can be, it is such an expression that people feel they must sing. If they're not speaking anymore, they're compelled, right? That's the drama of it. So how important is the performance, the performer?
Well, I mean, like with all the performing arts, if the material is superior, or superior to what, but if it's good, you know, and worthwhile, going through the great pains of putting it on, then it should be executed in a way, you know, as simply said, good as possible. I don't think an audience has to be like critics. You know, these narrow gauge critics that you meet in opera performances who know it all and have seen it all, and, you know, show off their expertise. Now, all of that is great fun and has a long tradition and all of that, but it's not it's not the experience that I'm after when I go to the opera. I want to hear the music primarily, and see what's happening on stage, and I do it quite often, that I don't follow what's happening on stage anymore, and I just listen to the music, because it's in the music. The action and the drama is happening in the orchestra pit.
Now, you don't always know the language, I assume, of all the ones you're listening to, right? So do you even have to know the language?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't think it helps you much anyway, because you don't understand the technique of singing in you know, Western culture is detrimental to the exact understanding of the text. Ideally, you should be able to understand, and the great singers can convey the text as clearly as the music. It's all, you know, various traditions, various strands of you know, philosophy about it, the eras in history, where they say, no, the voice, the tone is the most important, and then others say, you know, modern opera says more. No, you have to understand the words too. Verdi himself said, prima la parola. So you have to understand. Well, it's rarely achieved, but if it is, and when you see, yeah, it is possible, then it's astounding. It's really astounding.
Now, do these, you know, Beethoven or Mozart or Strauss, or, you know, do they each have a different voice? You know, like a different thing they're trying to talk about?
Well, yeah, I mean, that would be, of course, you know, part of the historical. I'm sorry, I apologize. A
little music to help us through our story.
I didn't silence these devices. You know, I mean, as much as music is the voice of its time and of the individual, and of course, most definitely.
You know, you've directed you've directed stage plays and movies and operas. When you just get a script for an opera, like how do you even begin to take that apart, and put it back together? Like as a director, how do you think about it?
Well, I go from the music. I take it, as much as it sounds a little pretentious, but I'm more interested in the score.
Mm-hmm.
I can't really read piano excerpts because I'm not a musician,
Right.
but I can not read a score like musicians do, because musicians read scores like we read books. Literally, they say, "Oh, no, that's pretty good," and they look at a page with 32 instruments, different voices. They look at it. Oh, well, fantastic!
Right.
Turn the page.
Right.
Curious about what's happening 10 pages down. I can't do that. I wish I could.
Right.
I think very few directors can, but there are some. But listening to the music, I can read it in the score. I can follow it, and that's what I do over and over again. And then I as soon as it's possible, because they're always very busy and all over the place, I try to communicate with the conductor.
Mm-hmm.
To me, the conductor is the most important person in this whole endeavor. And as much as you can interpret a play in different ways, whether you should or not is a different discussion. You can, of course, interpret an opera score in different, what is it that you want to be predominant? What is it that you want to kind of push a little further into the background? What is it that where are your turning points, dramatic turning points? It literally is musical theater.
So do you have to sit with the conductor and listen to it together and say, a little less here, a little more there? Is that the way?
No, that's what the conductor does. The director has no business interfering with that, unless he really knows. And I don't think there is a director on earth who knows as much as a conductor does.
When they send you a project, though, for example, do you get a recording of it so that as you're reading through it, or how are you're looking at it, but are you also listening to some tape or some? They send you something?
Well, first of all, with the known repertoire, you can have the recordings for the past, sometimes even literally 100 years.
Do you listen to those, or do you want to do your own interpretation?
No, I listen to those because, as I said, I can't read it out of the score. And piano excerpts I can't read at all. I see the music, but a musician tells you that's a very good excerpt because it represents what the orchestra does. It's very difficult to actually arrange a whole orchestra for piano. So I listen, but I listen privately. I don't do that with the conductor. With the conductor, I then I go through the score and ask him the questions, because I think I think that what interests me as a director is the musical points of drama, not so much the obvious dramatic points in the plot.
Right.
Right, but
so like an emotional connection between two characters.
For example, or an outside perspective of what's going on between the characters, and it's. Yeah, people spend their lives studying that kind of stuff. So I'm not gonna get in front of them and say, "Well, we're gonna do it like I think it should be."
From your perspective, so you were saying it's musical theater, but there's one difference. Musical theater, they talk, they sing, they break into song, right? What is it about the opera that is it that the emotion is so high that you have to sing? Is it something about the full expression of being human that it must be a song, or no?
I mean, I've heard that. Definition, so to say. When does a human being start to sing? When speaking is insufficient, and no, it's an art form,
right.
You know. You don't tell a painter he paints when other depictions are insufficient, when there's no other way to express yourself anymore. I don't think, you know, for the 19th century, all of this romantic and late romantic and post-romantic approach was, I'm sure, the right thing. But we're in the 21st century, you know. We can't say it has no meaning for us, because it does. So what's the meaning? That's interesting. We have to. I'm not necessarily an advocate of everything is a construct, you know, but most things are, especially in the theater. And so our job really is to, depending on whether you're involved in the production or whether you're in the audience, is to participate in what's happening right now.
Is that different in your mind? You know, watching you know, Shakespeare, is that different than watching the Magic Flute, you know, or Mozart? Is there a different thing going on between these things, or is it, even though they're singing in one, is there a difference between the art forms?
Yes, most certainly. There is an orchestra. You don't have the orchestra in Shakespeare. You know, the orchestra that puts it together, all together into one unity, and because it's music, lifts it one higher. So I don't know. I hesitate to compare, because they are really entirely different. Yeah, they happen on a stage, and words are involved. True, but the fact that the music plays makes a huge difference.
Is it when you're casting for opera, you know, is it similar to the way you would cast a movie? You know, I only know casting a movie, like they just put a bunch of people on tape, you look at them, then you bring a couple in a room and you have them sing for you. I mean, is it
Well,
that kind of process?
It more or less happens that way, but the director not always has an input.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, you're being asked, and it depends on the opera house and the circumstances, but on the big European opera stages, the cast is completely fixed before they reach out to a director.
Now, is the blocking still the director's purview, or?
Yeah. Well, if you can sort of exert enough influence and convince the singers to actually do it, because some say, no, I can't do it, because then I can't sing properly.
Right.
You know, or they always hesitate to sing, you know, to the side or even back. You know, they want to be heard. I understand. So where exactly do you draw the line between what's necessary for your stage production and what's necessary for your musical production, and how can we combine that? What do you do if you have a singer who says, I can't do it that way because I need to sing to the front? So you need to find a good argument, you know, to convince him or her.
You know, Macbeth's been performed in New York every year for 300 years, but it's a very subversive, you know, play. So they cast it again and again, where they make it New York. It's starring Donald Trump, or it's starring Obama, right? And it's just been produced forever, but they're always trying to modernize this older play. Is it actually Macbeth, Priscilla, or was?
Oh, you're so with the play. You have the wrong play.
Play. Which play? Which play is it? I don't.
Okay,
What?
somebody has to. I thought it was it Julius? Was it Caesar?
Maybe it's Julius Caesar, right? Like it could be Julius Caesar, and sometimes it's Trump, sometimes it's very controversial, even though it's a 300-year-old play. You know, the thing is that what is the interpretation that comes with, you know, if you're going to do, you know, the magic flute? What's the interpretation of the modern element of this very old thing?
Well, there's a wonderful essay by Susan Sontag, and she wrote it, I think, in the 60s even, and it's called Against Interpretation. And I'm a very, very strong advocate of that approach. It's not what's done on opera stages today. Yet, I wouldn't call all of that an interpretation, because I would say it's a superficial rearrangement of, you know, a redecoration in a way. If an opera is really holds up, and the ones that have been performed for the past 200 years, well, evidently have held up. It doesn't need help from a director in the 21st century to make sense. It makes sense on a different level. I don't need to drag it down to my level. And I need to take care that I, you know, rise up to it a little bit. And I don't need to have Don Giovanni play or Così fan tutte, to name a concrete example. I don't need to have it in a diner in New York to understand that it may have something to do with me. It doesn't have anything to do with me whether it's in a diner or in a, you know, somewhere else on a beach or on a stage even, unless what's in the music is actually taking place.
Right.
So I am a little bothered by these, what they call interpretations, because they're not. Can you play it? Yeah, you know why? Because Mozart is fantastic, but he's fantastic on a to say the word, on a transcendent level.
When you sit with Beethoven or Mozart and you're watching this and you're listening to it, you know, is that the essence of the person coming through that? Do you still, when you're, you know, watching Don Giovanni, are you seeing Mozart, you know, there resurrected in the flesh?
I wouldn't know. What's my comparison? You know, I could claim it. I could claim that. Well, that's pretty nutty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. You know,
I wish I had. I wish I had known Mozart. You know, I would beg him for lessons of anything.
Yeah.
When you're,
well, it'd be kind of funny if you actually met him and he was a total disappointment. You know what I mean?
What do you mean when you sit down with Mozart? I mean,
well, I'm saying you're listening to the music. Is he coming through?
I think what's when you so do you go and watch after you mount something? Do you go and watch it several times, or once you've done your job and you've seen it opening night, do you go back, and how much variation is there from night to night?
That depends on the discipline of the performance.
Yeah.
You know, look, you work, I don't know how long, I've never directed an opera in America. I don't know how long they rehearse here. In Europe, we rehearse 6 weeks on the regular, you know, 6, sometimes 8.
You know, I don't know what it's here, but I imagine it's probably like 2.5 weeks.
Yeah, and then what you get, everybody, you know, singers know the part. They have to know the part because there's too much to learn in a month or two. So they come. Most singers have performed or most of the time, singers have performed that role before. You know, they built up a whole image of what it is and what they need to do, and depending on where they're coming from in that respect, you know, they fall back into all the cliches that where you say, well, haha, that's exactly the singer kind of thing that you can, you know, caricature with your children at home when you put the recording on. That's not what we're after, is it?
You know, when you sit there and if you were, does the audience play a role in a great version of, you know, the Magic Flute?
Yeah, of course, the audience always plays a role, and in a way, whether it's the people present or you know, in general as a theoretical concept, you do it to be understood. If you say I don't care whether they get it or not,
Right,
you can do that, you know, but it will leave a lot of people frustrated and behind. Now, that does not mean that you go and say, okay, I'll do something that pleases everybody, or that's likely to be very, very popular with audiences. It happens most of the time.
right.
But I don't find that interesting. I don't want anybody to jump at me. You know, I want to be invited to kind of, as an audience, or member of an audience, I want to be invited to participate and contribute to the evening. It's
Yeah.
sorry.
Oh, no. I mean, I'm thinking about, you know, the barriers that we have, and like, why do young people go? Do they not want to go? You know, do we have to, what work do we have to do? Or how do you think about that? And, you know, is it something that we can, you know, you obviously it has so much value for many people. What's going on that we don't think that they're,
You know, all operas all over the world deal with that conundrum more or less desperately, because they, you know, young people don't want to go because they say it's something for old people. Interestingly, they have said that, you know, for the past 100 years. So sooner or later, those young people who don't want to go because of the old people will be the old people, and then, you know,
Right.
I mean.
you went when you were 10. You went when you were 10 years old. You know, I'm just thinking, my parents made me go to classical you know, performances all the time, and I grew up just spellbound. It wasn't opera, but we'd go,
Yeah.
really little, like 6, 7 years old. And so is it part of that? Is it expensive? Like, what are the other problems around it? Or has it just gotten a bad rap? And also, are there contemporary operas, you know, the Susan Sontag, it's an interesting thing to think about, but are there contemporary operas that you're really excited about, or composers that you feel like, wow, this has relevance? Like, what's the Corona COVID opera going to be? You know, what's going to come out of where we are?
That really would be the tradition of opera, you know, because that's how opera came about. It was, yes, at first in court. Well, everything of that kind happened first in court. Amongst the population, they had different forms of culture that was at their disposal. But, you know, to put something on a stage, first of all, you needed to have a stage, and second, you needed to have had the musicians. You needed to have had the financial means to commission. Not that they made a living, but, you know, to commission a piece like that, to produce a piece. So that at that time, it was only the court. And then when you know, the bourgeoisie slowly established, they aspired to the same cultural values, and it became more of a common thing that Aida is a pretty good example, because Aida was written for the opening of the Suez Canal.
Right.
So yes, it had something to do with the immediate moment. They didn't have television, they didn't have social media, they didn't have all that that inundation of irrelevancies to take their minds off. This is how they dealt with, and this is how they dealt with their lives and the world of their time. And this is really how drama came about to begin with. And then it was they added music. They found that singing is a way of communicating, a very directed. You can even prove that physically. It goes through the ear. It's a mechanical stimulus that then gets transferred into a nervous stimulus that then gets transferred into an emotional one. Right. So that's how they expressed their needs, and their during Verdi's time, a new opera was a sensation. That's what people talked about. Now we have, I don't know, we have other things, other days, but that's how yes, opera should be. It should be a daily basic staple.
We as the audience, if we haven't been exposed to a lot of opera and we don't understand the language, what should we be thinking when we're sitting there? Should we close our eyes and just let the music wash over us and see how we feel?
Don't think.
Sorry?
He's saying don't think.
Well, I mean, no, you can think, but don't think you need to be an expert.
Right.
Try to, it's basically, with all the arts, it is the same thing. Yes, we know, the more you know, the more you see. Where do you start? Well, you got to start somewhere. The problem right now is that it is juxtaposed with popular music and popular musical theater, which is, it doesn't have to be dumbed down at all just because it's popular. Right. Musical theater, Stephen Sondheim's musicals are some of the most sophisticated drama and music that you can hear.
Right.
And it's still very approachable. But it's not this deluge. It's not this commercial onslaught where they, just throw things at you to impress you, and you leave sensationalized, possibly, but not really necessarily inspired.
Right.
Not everything has to happen that way. With a little effort, opera can be very gratifying. It's expensive, Priscilla, you said that. That's a huge problem. So like with real estate speculation, sooner or later, a certain portion of the population is more or less outbid or bought out, or excluded for mere economical reasons, and that's a great pity.
Are you confident about the future of opera?
I am pretty confident about the future of opera, because look, I really think, just to finish our former thought, I think the most part of opera production should be new operas. It's unaffordable. They can't possibly do that. You get more of that in Europe because it's subsidized.
Yeah.
In America, you don't have subsidies, and if you do, they're ludicrously low.
Right.
So they have to look. what a ticket on Broadway costs you what? $200 now?
Mm-hmm.
Really bad. Yeah.
People have no problem paying $200 for Broadway, and
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, titillation.
Yeah.
But when you charge $200 for opera, they say, "Wow, it's so expensive." I'm not gonna.
But it's so. It's almost twofold though, because you don't have, like, for Broadway, for whatever reason, people, it just seems, it seems to be more accessible. And again, that's a knowledge base where we don't have the education, we don't have it as really as much of a cultural stable as you do in Europe with opera. And then I'm wondering, I'm thinking, should there be a GoFundMe, or should Julia?
I don't think it'd be quite enough.
Get it. I mean, but to get it, you talk about the expense. I think it's important for people to understand it's because of you need the orchestra, right? I mean, so all the reasons what make it expensive is, for example, can you have an opera with a chamber, music, 5 musicians?
Of course you can. Of course you can.
Why is it so expensive? Like, what makes it? What are some of
it really is the orchestra. The Met had one of the best orchestras probably in the world. An orchestra doesn't get to that level by occasionally playing together. They're there every day playing together, and they educate each other, learning new pieces, rehearsing with different conductors. An orchestra, apart from the fact that they have probably the strongest union, an orchestra is expensive. Yeah, every single individual started when they were 5 and didn't do anything in their whole lives to get to that point, to be in that orchestra. Yeah, is that worth it? Well, I say it is. What do they do? What do they do on Broadway? Orchestras become too expensive. We reduce it to 7 players, and the rest we do MIDI files and computer generated. I'm not interested in anything computer generated, to tell the truth.
Right.
So people are expensive.
People are expensive. For the folks that are listening, watching, we have Christoph Waltz with us. Some of you may know him for other reasons, incredible actor, of course, director, but his love of opera, directing opera. Tell us, like, what we should listen to. Help us. Like, what do you love when you're just, you want to just hang out or relax? First of all, do you listen to it? Should we be listening to it? If we can't go, maybe we listen. What do you love to listen to?
If I may catch on to one thing that you just say, relax. It's listening to music at all, other than easy listening. It's not a wellness thing. It's an active engagement in a communicational process. And you can have in that respect, you can have simpler ones or more complex ones. That doesn't mean, that fewer players make it simpler necessarily, because it depends on the musical situation. But it's different for everyone. There is no recipe, no formula. This is what you need to do in order to get something out of opera. It's trial and error. The biggest musical, it was almost a war in the 19th century, was about Wagner. There was one of the most influential critics in Vienna at the time, Eduard Hanslick, was a fierce opponent of Wagner. And these people really knew about music. They didn't just go and see a performance and then have an opinion and sort of blog it. They really knew about music. And it was a huge fight is Wagner the genius that some claim him to be, or is he just like a bloated and self-important, not charlatan, but usurper? Other people would have laid down their lives to go to Bayreuth to listen to a Wagner opera. It's your thing. It's your thing. You don't have to conform to an expectation that you assume to be imposed on you by high culture society. Then you're already then stay where you are. That's that if you make yourself that small to say no, it's just no, it's for you, and you have to find how and where and when and what, and then it's gratifying.
Christoph, thank you so much for coming on. It's a total pleasure as always.
It was a great pleasure.
Yeah.
I hope we made some sense.
Yes, we did. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to go find out what I like.
Okay.
Yeah, and already you're you're into it.
I'm interested.
Okay, that wasn't for me, but that was not the only opera. Let's go listen to another one.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christoph.
Thanks.
Yeah, pleasure.
Be well. Take care.
Thank you, you too.